is our i24 News correspondent in London, Jonathan Sacerdoti. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, Jonathan, we talked a lot about the international community reaction tonight, and where does the Britain stands in this current conflict in the Middle East?
Well, today the British Foreign Secretary, William Hague, called for an immediate de-escalation and restoration of the November 2012 ceasefire. And he said that he spoke directly to Mahmoud Abbas and also to Avigdor Lieberman. And speaking after those phone calls, the Foreign Secretary said he had discussed his deep concern about the number of civilian casualties and the need for all sides, as he put it, to avoid further escalation and further injuries and the loss of innocent life. In his statement, he said that he told Minister Lieberman that the continuing rocket attacks from Gaza are completely unacceptable and that Israel has the right to defend itself against those attacks. But the whole world, he said, wanted to see de-escalation. And he says that he welcomed President Abbas's call for a ceasefire and urged him to do all he could to help bring that about. He also mentioned that he would be bringing this up with other nations' foreign secretaries in Vienna over the next couple of days, and that he said that on the 10th of July, a couple of days ago, he had spoken to the Egyptian Foreign Minister, Sameh Shoukry, and asked him to take an active role in achieving some sort of ceasefire. So it seems that Britain is continuing its support for Israel's action, but also saying that it definitely wants to see a de-escalation. It wants to see a fall in the number of lives of the victims who are being killed in these operations, and it would like to see international efforts to try to bring this outcome about. Yes,
of course. So if we want to try to look at it from the ground perspective, any of the British, let's say, ambassadors or envoys do understand what exactly is going on the ground, do understand that the situation is a little bit more complicated, than to just sit down on the table and try to discuss this conflict, because the situation right now is that Hamas is really weak, that other small groups are taking control over the Gaza Strip, that Israel is basically almost unable to stop this aggression, because it cannot stand still about this attack. The ambassadors, the politicians, the international community does understand it, because if we're watching the international media, this is not what we are seeing.
I think you're absolutely right to say that most of the politicians speaking out on this, such as William Hague in this situation, and a lot of those covering it, even in the press here, have a limited understanding, or at least display a limited understanding in what they're saying publicly. When one follows this more closely, I mean, for example, just having downloaded the Red Alert application on my smartphone here, I'm aware very much of every single incoming rocket attack on Israel that is heading towards a populated area. I think that there's absolutely no sense of that in the coverage that is taking place across the British media, certainly. One doesn't see any mention of these rockets, and I think the success of the Iron Dome anti-missile system has been, of course, a great blessing to the civilians of Israel, but in the PR war, which is always the war that goes on in tandem with any actual operation on the ground, in the PR war, Israel has almost scored an own goal with such an effective protection system, which is not to say it shouldn't exist, but it means that every time one of these rockets doesn't destroy a building, doesn't kill anybody, there seems to be no interest in the fact that it ever took place in the press here. And when there's no interest in the press, the general population don't know. And when the general population don't know, the politicians don't feel a need to reflect it in their public statements. And in part, that's what's going wrong here in terms of the PR of the war for Israel. People in the United Kingdom don't have any sense of what it is for that many people in Israel to be living under such a hideous threat and such an ongoing sense. And they don't have any sense of the need for that to be resolved so that there's a more peaceful, more quiet situation for the citizens of Israel.
Yes, you know, Jonathan, maybe we should invite some of the international community ambassadors to live 1 week in Sderot and 1 week in the Gaza Strip, and maybe then they will start understanding what exactly is happening here. Jonathan Sacerdoti, thank you very much for this.